In 1977, Fleetwood Mac made Rumours, one of the best-selling albums in history. 40 million copies, 31 weeks at #1. They had just done the impossible. And that created a problem almost no band has ever survived. What do you do next? Most groups in that position make Rumours again. A safer, smaller copy of the thing that worked. The record company wanted exactly that. The whole industry wanted it. What they got instead was one of the strangest decisions in rock history. Lindsey Buckingham, the man who had shaped the sound of Rumours, refused to repeat it. He had become obsessed with punk and new wave, with the raw, stripped-down music coming out of England. He looked at the biggest album in the world and decided the follow-up should sound like the opposite of it. The result was Tusk, a sprawling experimental double album that cost a fortune to make and deliberately threw away everything that had made Rumours a phenomenon. At the time, it was seen as a commercial disaster, a career suicide. The sound of a band walking away from its own success on purpose. And that decision is where the long unraveling of Fleetwood Mac begins. Not with a fight, not with a death, with a choice to destroy the formula at the exact moment the formula was worth the most. This is the final chapter of our Fleetwood Mac story. How the biggest band on earth spent the next 45 years slowly tearing itself apart. If you followed this series to the end, take a second to hit the like button. It's the best way to tell YouTube these long stories are worth telling. Because what came after Tusk is a slow-motion collapse spread across 4 decades. Addiction, a firing, a return, another firing, and finally a loss that no reunion could ever fix. So how does the greatest soft rock band of all time end? Not with one explosion, but with a long, drawn-out goodbye. Tusk came out in 1979. It cost over $1 million. Reportedly the most expensive rock album ever made at that point. Lindsey recorded parts of it in a bathroom for the sound. The title track featured the entire USC marching band. It was brilliant, bizarre, and utterly uncommercial by the standards of what came before. It sold 4 million copies for any normal band, a triumph. Following Rumours, it was treated as a failure because it only sold a fraction of what its predecessor had. The label was furious. Lindsey had made his point, and it had cost the band its untouchable status. But something else was happening in these years that mattered more than any album. Stevie Nicks was becoming a star in her own right. In 1981, she released her solo debut, Belladonna, and it went to #1. Edge of 17, Stop Dragging My Heart Around. Suddenly, Stevie was arguably bigger as a solo artist than Fleetwood Mac itself. That shifted the balance of power inside the band permanently. Stevie no longer needed Fleetwood Mac the way Fleetwood Mac needed her. She was a global icon, mobbed everywhere, the shawl and top hat witch queen of American rock. And she was also, by her own later admission, sinking deeper into a cocaine addiction that would nearly kill her. Everyone in the band was struggling. The drugs that had fueled Rumours had not gone away. They had dug in. Mick Fleetwood, despite earning millions, declared bankruptcy in the mid-80s, his money gone to cocaine and bad investments. The most successful band in the world was quietly falling apart from the inside. They kept making records. Mirage in 1982 was a deliberate return to a more commercial sound, and it worked. Then in 1987 came Tango in the Night, a lush, glossy, enormous hit. One of their best-selling albums, full of songs like Little Lies and Everywhere. But Tango in the Night was made under enormous strain. Lindsey did much of it alone in his home studio. The band was barely functioning as a unit. And when it came time to tour the biggest album they'd had in years, Lindsey Buckingham did something that shocked everyone. He quit. On the eve of the tour, the man who had shaped the band's entire sound walked out, and the fight that caused it got physical. In 1987, at a band meeting before the Tango in the Night tour, Lindsey Buckingham announced he was leaving. The confrontation that followed was ugly, a screaming argument that, by several accounts, turned physical, with Stevie Nicks and Lindsey at the center of it. He walked out and did not tour the album. Fleetwood Mac replaced him with 2 guitarists and carried on. They toured, they kept the name alive. But it was not the same band, and everyone knew it. The Rumours era magic depended on all 5 of them, and one of the 5 was gone. Over the next decade, the lineup splintered further. Stevie left for a stretch. Christine's involvement wavered. The band that had been a fixed constellation of 5 became a rotating cast, still touring under the famous name but missing pieces of its own heart. And then, in 1997, they did the thing everyone wanted. The classic Rumours lineup, Lindsey, Stevie, Christine, John, and Mick, reunited. The resulting live album and tour, The Dance, was a massive success. All the old wounds, it seemed, could be set aside when the 5 of them stood on a stage together. The next year, in 1998, Fleetwood Mac was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, the same ceremony where, as longtime viewers know, Bob Welch was cruelly left out. If you want that full story, it's a video of its own on this channel. Subscribe so you don't miss the ones connected to this. But reunions in Fleetwood Mac never meant peace. Christine McVie, exhausted by touring and the road life, left the band in 1998 and moved back to the English countryside. For 16 years, Fleetwood Mac carried on without her. Another core member gone, another hole in the harmony. Christine finally returned in 2014 to everyone's joy. For a few years, the classic 5 were whole again. And then, in 2018, the band did something that stunned fans around the world. They fired Lindsey Buckingham, the man who had built their sound, quit once, returned, and given them 4 decades, was pushed out for good. And the reason cut right back to the oldest wound in the band. The 2018 firing came down in part to a conflict between Lindsey Buckingham and Stevie Nicks, the 2 people whose broken relationship had powered Rumours 40 years earlier. Reportedly, a dispute over touring plans and an incident at a public event brought decades of tension to a head. Stevie reportedly gave the band an ultimatum. Lindsey was out. He was replaced once again by other musicians, and the band toured without him. Lindsey sued Fleetwood Mac over the firing. The suit was settled. But the message was clear. The partnership that had defined the band since 1975 was finally permanently over. Buckingham and Nicks, the couple at the center of it all, would not share a stage again. Lindsey spoke about it with real hurt. He had given the band his entire adult life, and in a cruel echo, he then faced his own mortality, a heart attack in 2019 that damaged his vocal cords. The man whose voice and guitar built Fleetwood Mac nearly lost both. But the deepest loss was still to come, and it was not about firings or feuds or egos. It was about the person almost everyone in the band described as its calm center. The one member nobody ever had a bad word for. Christine McVie, the writer of Songbird, Don't Stop, Everywhere, the warm alto at the heart of the band's harmonies, had always been the peacemaker. Through every feud, every firing, every addiction, Christine was the steady one. Stevie called her her best friend, her soulmate, the sister she never had. On November 30th, 2022, Christine McVie died at the age of 79 after a short illness. The reaction was immediate and enormous because Christine was the member everyone loved without complication. Her death did what no fight ever had. It made the end of Fleetwood Mac feel real. Stevie Nicks wrote that she had lost her best friend and that she did not know how to fully process it. Mick Fleetwood said the heart of the band was gone. And crucially, Both Mick and Stevie made clear that without Christine, there could be no Fleetwood Mac. Not out of drama, out of love. The band was the five of them, and now one of the irreplaceable five was gone forever. So this is how it ends. Not with a farewell tour, but with a funeral. And it forces a question about what this band actually was. Step back and look at the whole arc. Fleetwood Mac was not one band. It was a series of bands wearing the same name, a blues band under Peter Green, a fragile experiment under Bob Welch, a global pop juggernaut under Buckingham and Nicks. It survived departures that would have ended any other group over and over for more than 50 years. And that survival was the whole miracle and the whole curse. Fleetwood Mac could never quite die, and it could never quite be at peace. It just kept going. Through breakups, breakdowns, firings, and reunions, held together by the rhythm section it was named after, Mick Fleetwood and John McVie, the two men who were there from the very beginning to the very end. Think of everyone this band consumed and created. Peter Green, who built it and lost his mind. Danny Kerwin, who was destroyed by it. Bob Welch, who saved it and was erased. And the Rumours 5, who turned their own heartbreak into the soundtrack of millions of lives and paid for it with their relationships. The music outlived all of the pain. Dreams went to #1 again in 2020, over 40 years after it was written, when a stranger's video sent it viral. Teenagers who were not born when Rumours came out know every word. The songs escaped the wreckage that made them. That is the strange gift of Fleetwood Mac. Everything that was broken in those people, every affair, every addiction, every betrayal was poured into songs that made the rest of us feel less alone. They could not save themselves, but the music they made from failing to save themselves has outlasted almost everything else from their era. Christine McVie once said that the band's whole story could be summed up simply: they made great music and they made a mess of their lives, and the two things were the same thing. You could not have one without the other. Fleetwood Mac is gone now in any real sense. There will be no reunion without Christine, but 5 decades of music remain. The blues, the experiments, the heartbreak, the harmonies, a complete record of one of the most turbulent and human stories in the history of rock. This has been the Fleetwood Mac Files. 5 chapters, 5 eras, one impossible band. Thank you for hearing them. If this series meant something to you, like it, subscribe, and tell us in the comments which chapter hit hardest. We do this every day.